For about slightly less than as long as there is proof of there having been humans, there is proof of there having been stories. And before copyright, stories used to be shared more or less lawlessly. Telling stories is a basic human function. When an ancient human told another ancient human, "Hey homo, I just found a dank valley full of mad berries over there. We should go get some berries." That's storytelling. One is conveying to the other past information as well as other bits of data. It's a shit story with no narrative told semi-verbally, but it delivers on one of the two main purposes of storytelling: value. And it doesn't need to be traditional value. The story can be for all purposes worthless, but it still conveys something. In this case, the value is the location of a dank valley full of mad berries. No, not you, Matt Berry. This joke sucks. The other merit of storytelling beyond purpose or value is the enjoyability or consumability of the thing itself.
Consumability itself, aka bingeability, as well as its relationship with length, are hard to define, and that task is well outside the scope of this video.
When people talk about guilty pleasures or say things are more fun than good, they're talking about media of low value but high consumability. Meanwhile, when people on Letterboxd call a movie a hard but rewarding watch, they're saying the media is of supposedly high value and low consumability. And these two purposes have basically stayed the same for the last 300,000 years. That's right. Someone out there 40,000 years ago gooned to a cave painting. Some people argue that other animals who have basic communication skills count as conveyors of narratives too. When a bee wiggles in a way that means is that basically storytelling? I don't care. But you see that it's fundamental, if not universal. The purpose of stories can be defined as answering questions. This is what we see in the oldest living narratives, morality tales of the old world designed to answer some of our most basic questions like, is murder bad and can I download a car? They're very value over consumability type narratives. Before we tackled complex questions such as is kissing boys evil, there were the two most basic questions. Where did we come from and where will we go? These are big boy questions, quite possibly the biggest and the boyest, but there's no possible way to quantify that. You can't answer those questions with a simple narrative like Steve made it in his back garden to cheer his wife up. You need a bigger, more impactful, singular event. You need an apocalypse. Intro A, a word on the origins of the apocalypse and our collective obsession with it. The apocalypse, the end of days, Steve's divorce, Ragnarok. In a word, the world's end. 3 words. Apocalypses are nothing new. As I've just name dropped, they appear in some of the world's oldest religions and have been appropriated, passed around, parodied, and iterated upon from one religion to another since the first Stevian cycle. That's a long time ago! The gods defeating the Titans or the Abrahamic birth of the world in Genesis are examples of apocalypses that happen at the beginning of the story as setup. Meanwhile, Ragnarok or the Rapture are examples of end-type apocalypses. Ragnarok is more of an endless cycle of death and rebirth, meanwhile the Rapture or Steve's divorce are more of a pencils down, emergency theme park closure, full stop kind of end-type apocalypse. These creation myths and destruction tales are the base stories of many religions and as such answer our base questions. Where do we come from and where do we go? Birth and death. We need apocalypses to answer these questions. The rapture even appears in the book of Revelations, and the word apocalypse derives from the ancient Greek word apokalypsis, which means to unveil or reveal. Literally a great status quo shifting answer. Apocalypses can take questions beyond human comprehension and scale and humanize them, neatly putting them into stories. Instead of the vast, vague, unknowable nothingness before your birth and after your death, you get something, anything, a comprehensible event. Why is it like this? This guy did it. You're gonna die in a Spider-Man suit. This is a roundabout way to satiate our curiosity of how we got here and what will happen after we're gone in a controlled environment. If sleep is death being shy, then the fictional apocalypse is like sexting with death. It's about as close as you can get to the real thing without crossing the infinite gap of understanding and experiencing it. It's all the benefits of death like certainty, finality, and answers without any of the pesky drawbacks. Like death. It allows us to poetically explore death, translating its chaos and irreversibility into an inherently controlled format, a story. That, in short, is literally the apocalypse, its origins and its basis functions within narrative. Now, let's talk about the literary apocalypse. The literal definition of what is literally an apocalypse is any start or end of the world event. It can be a momentary lapse in existence like the flood in Genesis, or it can be a guy named Apocalypse like Apocalypse and Apocalypse. Anything that can be convincingly called the end of the world. It's literally the apocalypse. A literary apocalypse, however, is any singular event that changes the status quo of a story in a way that affects the setting and all the main characters. But a literal apocalypse is not necessarily a literary apocalypse, and a literary apocalypse is not necessarily a literal apocalypse. These two can go together or appear on their own. With that in mind, intro sees several words on the different genres of literary apocalypses using literal apocalyptic examples. Literary apocalypses have types and genres. Apocalypse type is mainly concerned with the actual function of the literary apocalypse within the narrative, and it's measured in scale and chronology. Apocalypse genre are the literal contents of the apocalypse, and is a big deciding factor in the appeal of the apocalypse, i.e. what kind of questions it satiates. Question is the primary purpose of the literary apocalypse. The oldest apocalypses dealt with the oldest questions of birth and death. They explored our own creation and destruction by analogizing them to the creation and destruction of the world itself, because in our subjective experience, those events are basically analogous. Creation myths or star-type apocalypses, whether it's God or Titans or the dream of a playful deity or Steve's second marriage, answer the former question. Birth. What came before we were here is one of the great uncertainties, and you can never truly know the answer because you weren't there. You could be an alien orphan adopted by international assassins for all you could ever know. So these stories satiate that question. N-type apocalypses answer the latter question, whether as a full stop or a death and rebirth. Those two ideas may seem to be fundamentally opposed to each other, but their appeal is fundamentally the same. You are afraid to die, of course you are, who isn't? But you were born just in time, because off in the distance, right where the sea meets the horizon, is the end of the world. And you're not gonna have to die alone. We will all go together when we go. Our original apocalypses answered our primordial questions, but society evolved, and with it so did the questions we were asking. Morality and basic rules appeared as more questions got more specificer.
We've had time to develop more questions than any one person could ever hope to answer. Subsequently, we now have way more genres of literary apocalypse.
A strong contender for default apocalypse is the hungover specter, the zombie apocalypse. They're typically star-type apocalypses that happen anywhere from a few days to a few months before the beginning of the story, with more than a little help from the Coma Fairy, and bring humanity back to square one. Zombie media is a safe, realism-coded, fantastical setting to explore the darker parts of the world and our own psyche. The zombies are not horror creatures, they're fantasy creatures. We simply spent decades recoloring them, honing their craft, mannerisms, and appearance in order to make them feel real. That's why you can't have a werewolf or vampire apocalypse. Well, you can have a werewolf apocalypse, but vampires need to feed on humans, so they can't... No, never mind, not the point. The point is, it's aesthetically wrong. Those two don't make a credible apocalyptic threat. Through realism coding, zombie apocalypses can explore dark and uncomfortable ideas without feeling ridiculous. Tough moral decisions, the self and the other. It's a postmodernist deconstructionist play on our most basic human questions.
Thus, the question it answers is, how do we reconstruct our morality in this new world? And you might say,
sure, that's what The Walking Dead is about, but all zombie media?
And no, of course, nothing is universal, but also basically, yeah.
Zombie apocalypses are a constant series of ethical decisions, from sharing food to what to do if someone gets bit. When our characters are answering any of these dilemmas, they are satiating our questions. This appeal of the zombie apocalypse is very much born of a God is dead type sentiment. In a world that now lacks that clear why for purpose or morality, i.e. God, an extreme situation like an apocalypse offers us a chance to re-examine morality and renew our purpose in life. This is also a point made by the joke Attack on Titan spin-off manga Attack on Schoolcast, in which Eren is so bored at school that he literally fantasizes about a zombie apocalypse. And some of you just went, same.
Zombie stories happen on the level of the interpersonal. They ask questions of rules and morality and allow us to re-examine basic ideas from the ground up, focusing on how we treat ourselves and the other. An example my sister is confused as to why I didn't bring up yet is Shaun of the Dead. Some of you may have yelled this yourself, and please stop, it's really loud,
and it happens every time someone watches this video, and it wakes me up in strange hours of the night, and I forgot my YouTube channel password, so I can't even make it private or anything, so please. Shaun of the Dead is undoubtedly, literally an apocalypse. For a few hours there, the world ended.
It is also true that this apocalyptic event is responsible for everyone's character arcs. It changes the status quo in a way that affects the setting and all the characters. But despite all this, it is not a literary apocalypse.
This is because it's not a singular defined event, but the setting of the movie. All the events of the story happen within the setting of the apocalypse, but no one event is a singular literary apocalypse. Now, Matisse, I hear you, I love your paintings, and that's a really good point.
What if one incident directly sets off the entire story's chain of events? Everyone in the 1996 Coen siblings' movie Fargo's world is turned upside down with no exception by one singular event. Frank Gallagher hiring Juan Sanchez, an off-brand Russian Bruce Willis, to kidnap his wife.
Why am I Mr. Pink?
Steer being sent to night school at the beginning of A Brighter Summer Day because his eyes are stupid is also a chain of events narrative with some very stabby results. Same thing with I Saw the Devil. Every named character's life would be significantly different if professional crazy laugher Swami Sheik didn't kill this one specific guy's wife. Why don't I remember any of the wives' names? But how the characters are affected has to be defined by the specifics of the apocalypse. A literary apocalypse puts down a kind of two-way funhouse mirror through which characters can look and reminisce. Every character in a story with a literary apocalypse is defined by the comparison of what they were before and after the apocalyptic event. So in a zombie apocalypse, the mirror would be labeled a world where the zombining never happened. Every character is looking through that same mirror. That's what makes it apocalyptic. It's universality within the story. In Fargo, every character's mirror is labeled slightly differently. What if I hadn't paid those guys to kidnap my wife? What if my son-in-law hadn't paid those guys to kidnap my daughter? What if my dad hadn't paid those guys to kidnap my mom? Or even, what if I hadn't given this dude I know this other dude I know's number? Beyond differing perspectives from character to character, it's not even necessarily the same event. This is not a literary apocalypse, but a chain of events narrative. A second cousin of the literary apocalypse that lives close by but you don't see as much after you go to college. Disaster stories feel like the next obvious choice of apocalypse, but many disaster movies are like Shaun of the Dead in that the disaster is the setting and not any one singular event. San Andreas, starring eventual Egg Dwayne Egg Rock Johnson, has some pre-apocalyptically coded visuals, but we never know the characters outside the scenario of the disaster. Not except for a brief where are they now and a possible prologue. If a literary apocalypse is just any story event that affects the character arc, then Little Miss Sunshine is an apocalypse spiral. No. It has to be a singular defined event, the reaction to which can't be incidental, but directly defined by the nature of the event. Otherwise, it's not a literary apocalypse. Ironically, beautifully, universally, a good example of a disaster movie with a literary apocalypse is the other end of the Cornetto trilogy and 12-year-old me's favorite movie for a hot minute, The World's End. The World's End, the movie, ends in The World's End, the end. Then it has a short epilogue showing how everyone's lives are now different as a direct result of the singular apocalyptic frying of all technology at the end of the movie, which is a separate event from the alien apocalypse setting of the rest of the film. The appeal of the disaster movie is similar to the appeal of the zombie story, seeking to deal with life's alienations by introducing a high-stress environment that forces you to act and get out of your own head long enough to find meaning. However, where the zombie apocalypse is interpersonal, the disaster movie is personal. It's a chaotic situation that's too overwhelming for you to be concerned with anything other than your own immediate survival, a real put on your oxygen mask before helping the person in need scenario. The only apocalypse that can give zombies a run for their rotten flesh-covered money is the man-made one, be it a water world or a nuclear Armageddon. The undeniable aesthetic archetype of the man-made apocalypse are the desert dunes, your Mad Maxes and Fallouts. Holy shit. I killed a fly. Can't believe that just happened. The appeal is again similar to that of the zombies and disasters, but the man-made nature of the apocalypse puts an emphasis on man-made solutions rather than simple survival. This genre of apocalypse, especially the particularly historically and politically oriented examples such as Fallout, deal with questions of how we construct society, how we order it, and how different societies interact with one another. While disaster encapsulates the personal and zombies the interpersonal, the man-made apocalypse is societal in scope. These questions, how we survive, how we treat each other, how we build a society, are interlocked, and their root is again at our two primordial questions. Where'd you come from? Where'd you go? The conceptual purpose of literary apocalypses has not changed. They simply evolved alongside our questions, and the questions have kept getting more specific here. So, those are some examples of literary apocalypses that also happen to be literally apocalypses. But what exactly is a literary apocalypse? Part 1. But what exactly is a literary apocalypse?
Oh, hi!
A literary apocalypse is any singular event that changes the status quo of the story in a way that directly and uniquely impacts the setting as well as all the main characters. But you already knew that. Up until now, we've spoken about apocalypse genres, their flavor, their literal contents, their organs, and cherry-flavored life goop. On a more functional meta level, we have apocalypse type. The type of the apocalypse measures not its appeal, but its function within the story. Apocalypse genre tells you what the question is, but apocalypse type tells you how the question is asked. Apocalypse type is separated into chronology and scale. We've made a table as a visual aid, but mainly because it's so fun. Look at him! Look how cute he is! Look at him go! No, don't touch him! He's neutered. The vertical columns display scale from personal to universal. The horizontal rows display chronology from star type to end type. Chronology is literally when in the story does it take place. God is born out of chaos at the beginning of all Greek myths. The Last of Us starts with the outbreak of daughter death before skipping to our actual post-apocalyptic setting. These are star type apocalypses. On the other hand, if it's called the world's end or the end of days, that's a take a wild fucking guess type apocalypse. Scale is, well, it's the scale, sire. It's how big of an event it literally is. Personal scale apocalypses affect everyone in the story but are localized to our cast and the setting of their private lives. Major scale apocalypses are felt by all the characters in the story as well as the world at large. Most localized natural and political disasters fall in this category. Universal scale apocalypses range from planet changing, like the aforementioned world with all the water, to universe changing, like the vague fever dream of debatably positive masculinity that is the end of Gurren Lagann. Did your world get nuked? Sun exploded? This is the place for you. The chronological variation at this scale is so big because it's all experientially the same for us. Arguing whether it's better that the Earth explodes or the Sun explodes is like arguing the benefits of cutting back from 100 cigarettes a day to 99 cigarettes a day. Any scale of apocalypse can pair with any chronology. So now that we have our terms and conditions all laid out, let's look at some examples of literary apocalypses that are not literally the apocalypse. The star-type literary apocalypse happens at the beginning of the story or any amount of time before it. It sets up the context of the story, thereby defining the range of questions it will ask. Star-type apocalypses can be personal, like a particularly bad breakup or the death of a loved one. These tend to happen very little time before the beginning of the story. A great example of this is The Big Chill, a lovely 90 minutes of Jeff Goldblum fumbling every woman in a 10-yard radius set to some of the best music of all time that manages to sneak in a pretty good contemplation on the nature of death, grieving, and loss as a force for shared connection. The Big Chill is a quintessential dramedy, and dramedy is where personal-scale star-type apocalypses thrive. It's a great format for discussing anything that brings up a slurry of mixed emotions, like any kind of loss. And loss, especially when someone we know dies, is one of the most quietly apocalyptic things in our lives. 7 old friends and one lover of a recently non-alive man meet up to remember him and reminisce about their former lives together in a family home. The entire setting of the film, even if only for our main characters, is defined by the event of his death. It's not literally the apocalypse, it happens every day, but for you, the people you're close to and the people they were close to, it changes everything, and nothing will ever be the same. Star-type literary apocalypses can also be major, like the passing of a specific law or destruction of a specific country. They affect all the characters and are felt over the world at large, but in other places life is going on as if nothing happened. Peter Watkins' 1971 masterpiece Punishment Park is a great example as well as the best mockumentary ever made. It follows 8 friends who go to a newly opened theme park, Punishment Park, and find... Hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Yellow? What's up? Huh? What's the CIA? It's 1970, Nixon time, and Nixon has invoked the 1950 McCarran Internal Security Act, which authorizes the detainment of anyone judged to be a risk to internal security. These detainees are given the choice between federal prison or 3 days in Punishment Park. We follow 2 groups of 8, one currently on trial and one going through the titular Punishment Park. Where most mockumentaries are comedies that use the semi-transparent fourth wall of the format to let the audience in on the joke, Punishment Park lets you in on the pain. The Office and Parks and Rec are still primarily sitcoms. Things work out, and every arc has a satisfying conclusion. Punishment Park takes from documentaries the unpredictability and lack of control over what will happen. You learn very sporadic information about the characters based on what they happen to say in real story time. You learn how they act under pressure and what they think, more so than where they're from and what they like. It feels like a documentary, and it's perfect. And everyone in the movie is defined by the singular apocalyptic event of the invocation of the McCarran Internal Security Act, from the everyday citizens suddenly given the authority to judge others, from the participants in the park, whose very existence is now in jeopardy. The McCarran Internal Security Act would be repealed by Nixon the year of the film's release, and the Subversive Activities Control Board would be abolished the following year in 1972. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood straddles the line between major and universal scale star-type literary apocalypse, because while the story's plague happens worldwide, only America descends into theocratic fascism. So we have a localized setting and characters defined entirely by a singular apocalyptic event, but the event also happened to happen worldwide. What matters more in defining a literary apocalypse, the in-universe events or the audience's experience? Major-scale star-type literary apocalypses happen anywhere between a few years and a few decades before the beginning of the story, but tend to stay within living memory. They present a world that can be called alike to our own and explore extreme versions of questions that already exist today. Universal-scale star-type literary apocalypses can happen anywhere from 27 to 210 years before the beginning of the story, depending on which Fallout game you're playing.
I don't think I need to explain Fallout.
In Children of Men, everyone has gone sterile. The world's youngest person, baby Diego, the prick, is plucked by a knife at the ripe young age of 18, meaning the apocalypse happened less than 18 years ago. The thing about universal scale star-type literary apocalypses is that we already discussed them. Basically anything on a universal scale is literally an apocalypse. The end-type apocalypse is the one that happens at the end, and its function is to provide closure. One of the biggest producers of unanswerable questions in life is the lack of finality to things. There are no promised character arcs, and sometimes you and someone else will just never figure out your shit. The end-type literary apocalypse, whether comforting or terrifying, provides you with finality, an answer. Heck, maybe you're going to hell, but at least it's better than nothing. End-type apocalypses can be personal, like in No Exit for Seven. End-type apocalypses can be personal, like in Y Tu Mama Tambien. Tenoch and Julio never really had any limits with each other, and Luisa, who joins them on their road trip, is no different. But when they cross the one line they never have before, everything changes. This apocalyptic makeout sessions we learn from the epilogue is the end of their friendship, the defining feature of their characters, and Luisa fucking dies. End-type apocalypses can be major in scale, like the ending of Fight Club. Even if the banks don't end up crumbling, the blowing up of all their buildings and simultaneous death of Tyler Durden affects all three main characters as well as the entire Project Mayhem team, which will surely be felt in the world at large. The ending of Watchmen again straddles the line of major and universal scale literary apocalypse. Space Calamari incident completely shifts the status quo and lives of all the characters, as world peace is possibly achieved, but the direct effects are localized entirely to New York. Other countries will react and send aid and the world will shift, but the event itself is major, not universal. It's the opposite of The Handmaid's Tale. Instead of a universal event with a major scope of effects, the scope of effects is universal when the event itself is localized. End-type literary apocalypses can obviously be universal in scale. A good example is any story that ends with the end of the world. For some reason, while writing the script, I thought of Mirai Nikki. Let's ignore that thought. The ending of Hotline Miami 2 Wrong Number squarely and comfortably nukes the entire cast and world. Meanwhile, The World's End, the movie, ends in The World's End, the end. That's not the right clip. Now, Eagle Eye viewers among you, or indeed eyed viewers, may have noticed that the entire middle row of the table has gone thus far unutilized. This row is for any literary apocalypse that cannot conceivably count itself as a start or end type apocalypse. This, friends, enemies, frenemies, and splenemies, is the middle apocalypse. The mid-type literary apocalypse is far less common and about slightly less than as old, if not as old, as the other two types. The classic, you could say, biblical example is the flood of Genesis. God thought he didn't need the light to aim, and then he frantically called Noah up and was like, "Hey man, I'm resetting the earth." Because it's evil. Yes, this is totally on purpose, and I need you to build a boat and get a backup of everything I've ever made. And Noah's like, "Bet G," and so he survives the flood and repopulates the earth. What makes this a mid-type literary apocalypse is that we've already spent a substantial amount of time in an established status quo, and then we carry our existing characters over to a new status quo, seeing them adapt to a new part of the story. Earth was, then too much water, now Earth new. This is the middle apocalypse, and it is so freaking cool.
Part 2, the middle apocalypse is so freaking cool.
It's just so cool! Star-type apocalypses have the vast undefinable stretch of theoretical infinity up until the prologue, and end-type apocalypses have a predefined portion of the story to work with, right before the epilogue at the earliest. The mid-type literary apocalypse also has a defined range to work with, anywhere in the actual story, provided there's enough story before and after it so as to not count as a start or end-type literary apocalypse. This means that an apocalypse that only lasts the last 4 episodes does not count. Sorry, Weirdmageddon. A good rule of thumb for a mid-type literary apocalypse is to be at least a quarter away from the start or the end of the story, but the percentage needed shrinks the longer the work is. Length has an inherent effect on media. A 2-hour-long movie is gonna have a harder time creating a mid-type literary apocalypse than a several-season TV show or long-running comic book series would.
The closest thing I can think of is Psycho's famous protagonist shift III into the story, but because he only spent 40 minutes with Marion before switching over to her sister, you could easily argue that this is really just set up for the actual story.
Mid-type apocalypses are hard to pull off in general because you have to be able to write an apocalyptic event as well as all the characters in realistically different ways before and after the event. The appeal of the mid-type apocalypse is the same as that of tossing around a jar of spiders. Is to shake things up and see how everyone reacts. You take something defined and you alter it radically. Birth and death are our own personal start and end of the universe, but on our way between the two we face an infinity of personal and major apocalypses, and through each of these events we must now evolve and adapt. That is the appeal of the mid-type literary apocalypse, to answer the questions that lie between birth and death. A great example of a personal scale mid-type literary apocalypse is the breezy 5.5 hours long Ingmar Bergman directed Fanny and Alexander. The film begins with an hour and a half of turn of the 20th century Swedish Christmasing. We meet this large extended family and are given time to get to know them as they are bathed in holiday glows. At the head of this family is the father, Oscar, a soft, towering figure radiating the kind of calm, forgiving energy usually reserved for Jesus Christ or Santa Claus. We are fully immersed into the status quo. The family is not perfect, and there are things to fix, like our philandering uncle, the scamp, but we love them anyway. We are still in the world of a soft family winter story. But then, the world ends. The father, Oscar, dies, and the family is sent reeling. The mother, Emily, remarries to Count Frollo, and the entire movie is shifted onto its side. It's now a dark drama, a fight for survival between this young, grieving boy and the strange, cold man who has taken his mother from him. The shakeup is so strong that the genre of the film itself changes irreversibly. It is important to mention that there is a 3-hour-long theatrical cut of Fanny and Alexander, where the time spent with the characters is lessened and so is the impact. But we're not discussing it, so move on. You could make a similar argument to Sago here. Oscar dies less than a quarter into the movie, not even clearing our most basic rule of thumb. And while 5.5 hours is staggering for a film, it's still only half the length of a season of Game of Thrones. However, Oscar's death feels world-shattering. There is one specific mirror. What if he hadn't died? And that event singularly defines the setting and all of the characters for the rest of the movie, similarly to how Oscar himself defined the first hour and a half. When the genre shifts, it's so fundamental that to the audience, it might as well be an apocalypse. So there's a chance that the experiential aspect is more important than the literal one in a literary apocalypse. So much of the literary apocalypse is about how we categorize and understand stories, while some of these revivals can almost count like their own separate entities. So, like France, they should probably stay in the realm of thought experiments. Si. Les expliquerai les spirales apocalyptiques plus tard. Personal scale mid-type literary apocalypses are also where you find a lot of time skips from anime and sitcoms. The story takes a break for a while all the characters train or do politics or whatever, and then they come back and we get to see how everyone changed. It's a joyous event for every woman and boy, but not all of these count as apocalypses. Some of them aren't defined around a singular event. Others don't affect all the characters universally, and others yet don't change the status quo of the setting at all. Singularity, universal impact, and status quo change. These are the three aspects you need overall to count as a literary apocalypse. Shit. That's fine. A great easy example of a major scale mid-type literary apocalypse is Akira, but no, Akira's apocalypse happens at the end of the story. That's wrong! Akira, the movie, only adapts the first 3 volumes of Akira, the manga. In the manga, Lupe Fiasco and Akira, the child-shaped bomb, level Neo-Tokyo and take over part of the ruins, completely shifting the story from a cyberpunk mystery thriller to a post-apocalyptic psychic gang war. After 3 books of this meticulously rendered futuristic neon dystopia, we are shifted into a world of concrete and rubble, and everyone in the story is directly affected. Neo-Tokyo is transformed into a lawless wasteland. Characters who never would have teamed up are now working together, and we get the most deserved kiss in all of manga. You don't get it. You have to read Akira. Clocking in at 11 volumes is Berserk's Golden Age arc. The eclipse, or the apocalyptic unfriending of all of Guts' pals that ends this arc, is definitely felt throughout the world, and to say it defines the characters would be an understatement. The entirety of Berserk is basically a quest to get revenge for the eclipse. You could make that it's just a prologue argument here, but this gets into the effects of length again. 11 volumes for a prologue? That's longer than many full series. You can also pair apocalypses, having more than one per story, like the Star-type Fall of Walmaria and Mid-type Season 4 time skip in Attack on Titan. You can pair up a Star-type and N-type apocalypse, like the OG 1995 Journeys of Sad Boy and Friends. I mean, Evangelion, with its second and third impacts. You can even have all 3 in one story, like the aforementioned Akira, the manga, which begins 30 years after World War III, has our previously discussed mid-type literary apocalypse, and ends in whatever this is. Keep this in mind as we have a short word on apocalypse spirals. Many of you have been yelling at your screens for some time now. Some of you obscenities, others yet are unclear as to how YouTube videos work, but most of you have been naming series that I've foolishly ignored to mention thus far. The reason I haven't mentioned most of those is because they are not literary apocalypses, but apocalypse spirals. An apocalypse spiral, like Arthur, is a story in which the status quo is in such a constant state of flux that no one event can be designated a literary apocalypse. The rat's gay, you guys! There are 2 types of apocalypse spiral, structured and unstructured. Unstructured apocalypse spirals are stories wherein the status quo is in a constant state of flux but is not officially cataloged or delineated by the series. Shows like BoJack Horseman, Breaking Bad, and Legend of the Galactic Heroes, shows where every season basically has its own status quo,
are good examples of uninterrupted Hawking spirals.
Many events change everything, but you'd be hard-pressed to designate which of Bojack's, Bender's, Walt's enemies or Yang and Reinhardt's maneuvers is the singularly defining literary apocalyptic event. Unstructured Apocalypse Spiral is also a good description of anything Rick Remender has ever written, like Deadly Class or Black Science, stories where people die left and right and the world can casually end and restart. A structured Apocalypse Spiral is basically the same thing, but with an officially acknowledged segmentation and cataloging of the parts, often literally into parts. This is where you'll find most shows with a succession of protagonists like Doctor Who or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Sure, the protagonist change is fairly apocalyptic, but when 90% of the cast just change too, does it even count?
Because of the delineations, it's then more of a case to be made for structured apocalypse spirals occasionally crossing over into full-on literary apocalypse, mainly down to definition. That's why you saw some of these examples in our earlier Timeskip Lightning bout. But that's basically the apocalypse spiral. Where were we? Right. Is it possible to have two mid-type apocalypses in one story? Well, provided the story is long enough, it should theoretically...
Yes, you can. We've done it. It's amazing, and it's called 20th Century Boys. That's right, bucko. This entire thing is just a 20th Century Boys sleeper video.
To call Naoki Urasawa a J-Rock artist and occasional top 10 manga artist of all time list topper prolific would be somewhat of an understatement. Working since the mid-80s as an artist/writer before graduating to artist-writer, Naoki Urasawa is a critical acclaim machine, having won a plethora of awards over nearly a dozen full-length series. His most famous work, Monster, which ran from 1994 to 2001, follows Japanese heartthrob doctor Kenzo Tenma, who learns what you should never save the life of a blonde man. It's a winding and curling mystery narrative so enthralling that by the sixth time someone with all the answers promises to give Tenma the details, for sure, as soon as they investigate that strange-looking shadow, you're too hooked to care. Monster won many awards, including possibly the highest accolade a manga could receive at the time, a full-length adaptation by Madhouse. Most incredible, however, was that Urasawa was publishing a second series at the same time, which garnered almost as much critical and financial success. This is 20th Century Boys. Kenji's a convenience store owner, living with his aging mother and taking care of his AWOL sister's baby Kana. One day Kenji is out making a delivery, but no one is home, and on the doorstep he finds a strangely familiar looking symbol. Later at some old friend's wedding, Kenji tells his childhood friends about the incident, and after a totally healthy amount of drinking, they go to the site of their childhood secret base, formerly a wheat field, now transformed into an apartment building, and dig up a box of old mementos. Inside the box they find childhood keepsakes as well as a flag, a white piece of cloth bearing the same strangely familiar symbol Kenji saw earlier. This is because they're the ones who drew it. This secret base was where they spent all their time as children in the late 60s and early 70s. It's where they read comics, fought the villainous Mabo and Yanbo, and where they created the evil plan from which they would save the world. At the same time, a cult is steadily gaining in prominence. This strange group is led by the one known only as Friend, a masked charismatic enigma and supposed moon-loving miracle worker, brandishing the same symbol Kenji and his friends found. Alongside the flag brandishing the symbol of the cult was a comic book they had drawn, detailing a full plan for world domination, complete with doomsday device that Kenji and his friends were supposed to stop. As they investigate deeper and deeper into the Friend cult, they realize that the actions of the cult align with the plan set out by their childhood comic. So begins the chase to stop the cult's nefarious schemes and remember who Friend is. What follows is one of the most electric mystery narratives ever put to paper. Naoki Urasawa's trademark readability shines through as one volume melts into another and you stop calling your parents. At the center of it all is Friend, this seemingly magical stranger who knows everything about our heroes despite them not remembering a thing about him. You become intimately familiar with all these characters. Yoshitsune is the frog-looking nerdy guy. He's a bit of a scaredy cat, but that only makes him braver. And Maruo is a goofy loving dad who stands by his friends when the moment turns serious. We go to Thailand and meet Ocho, Kenji's best friend and thus far #1 candidate for who Friend is. Mainly because he disappeared a few years back after his, son died. We see how he came to Thailand, empty and despaired, full of grief, and how he learned martial arts and became a badass Bangkok street vigilante, busting underground psychedelic drug rings. He also finds a giant robot, Friend's doomsday device, and joins up with Kenji and the gang. We meet Yukiji, the only girl of their childhood group and the coolest woman ever. Seriously, she's like if Misato was a competent adult. She works security at an airport, drinks heavily, and makes up the main trio with Kenji and Ocho. And we get to know Kenji better, a wannabe rock guitarist who never quite made it and got faced with reality at the wrong time. We see his unconditional love for Kana, this child he was saddled with by his sister who he never once complains about. And we see the fire in him, the musician, the kid who played a rock song on the speakers in school without permission, and the guy he still is. There's this very powerful scene early on where after some discovery, Kenji returns home and begins playing his guitar aggressively, violently, primally, in a release of emotions, and as tears come to his eyes, we see that fire so long dormant in him at the beginning of the story, lit again with newly found purpose. As Kenji, Yukichi, and Ocho investigate, we learn crumbs of details about Friend, and every inch we get is exhilarating. We get to know this world, its people. Mabo and Yanbo are hot now. We see the steady creeping in of the Friend cult's influence. As more and more actions are perpetrated in their name, what starts as seemingly disconnected and independent actors begins to form a trend, before becoming actively explicit. All of this comes to a head with the blowing up of an airport in Volume 3, released just a year before the release of 9/11. Can I say the release of 9/11? There's something that feels prophetic about 20th Century Boys. It's got that very Transmetropolitan-esque quality that comes with well-done political horror. It just ages well. The steady gain in power of the Friend cult is so enthralling because it feels so real. If not in our world, at least in the world of the story. This culminates in the final fight. Kenji leaves the now 3-year-old Kana with his mother as he, Yoshitsune, Mauro, Yukiji, and Ocho head out to save the world. They face the giant robot, the doomsday device they designed as school children come alive. And we skip 14 years into the future. It's 2014, and now 17-year-old Kana is running through the streets of a vastly different Tokyo, and she goes to a monument to all those lost that night, and the ground beneath her is the giant emblem of Friend. This is roughly the end of Volume 5 of 24. This is the first thing Urasawa shows us upon skipping 14 years into the future, cutting off the final fight. That Friend won that night, and that the world, the setting, is now invariably different. This is the first middle apocalypse. Everyone in the gang is either in hiding, in prison, or in dead. Kenji has been labeled a terrorist, and the Friend party is the frontrunner for the next elections. It makes sense, after all. Friend is the one who saved the world from Kenji's robot. Yukichi is now Kana's mother figure, a stern woman sapped of her exuberance by grief and loss who spent the last decade and some caring for Kana. Maruo has been captured by the Friend cult.
Yoshitsune grows the beard.
This goes beyond the main cast, affecting every person's life in this new world, which has been singularly defined by that one night. Mabo and Yanbo are no longer hot. Nowhere is this clearer than with Kana, a strong, competent young woman now at the center of the story who has lost her father figure, Kenji, and will do anything to avenge him. The story shifts substantially, turning from mystery into active political thriller. And while it never recaptures the pure electricity of the first section of the story, the mystery remains thrilling throughout, no matter how many times we get the Urasawa classic.
Yeah, I'll tell you Yuan's backstory. The entire thing. Just give me 5 minutes, I need to go investigate a strange-looking shadow. We get that spider-shaking joy of seeing how all the characters changed physically and emotionally, and of how strong the Friend cult's influence now is, and about their new and improved doomsday plan. Virus Edition. The rest of the story from here is Kana regathering what's left of the Kanji gang in order to stop Friend's plan to gain full control of the world.
It has prison escapes, tearful reunions, twists, turns, classic rock, attempted papicide. That's Pope murder! And so much more, but here's the thing. Friend wins again. He beats the heroes, sends out his virus, and the world is once again transformed as we skip 2 years into the future and see a militarized dystopia controlled entirely by Friend. This moment, roughly 18 volumes into the story and hundreds of chapters into our already post-timeskip status quo, is 20th Century Boys' second mid-type literary apocalypse. There's not really a way to describe the first time you reach this point and realize that all the spiders have been shuck a second time. It builds upon the fascination of the first mid-type literary apocalypse, compounding the excitement with the layers of hype created by the realization that Urasawa just got you for a second time. Fool me once, shame on me, but teach me to fool and I'll shame you every day. Name one other series where the main villain would win twice. You stay out of this. Both of these are masterpieces in literary apocalypses. The first satiates the curiosity of meeting up with a friend you haven't seen in 10 years. The second satiates the curiosity of what happens when the heroes lose for real for real. As sad as the first apocalypse was in moments, the second apocalypse is downright dour. It's soul-crushing to see how bad things have gone. No one is doing good. But it still satiates our curiosity, whether by comfort or discomfort, with reunion or separation, with sadness or with joy. It still scratches that itch. The appeal of the mid-type literary apocalypse to some degree is to answer our questions that aren't birth or death, our midlife and hypothetical literary apocalypses of any scale. By having two mid-type literary apocalypses in one story, 20th Century Boy not only fluidly shifts genres across the story from mystery to political thriller to sci-fi dystopia, but also manages to push our questions to the very extreme of human experience. Between Kenji, Ocho, Yukichi, and Kana, we have seen fictional blood, sweat, and tears again and again. We saw these people grow. And of course they win in the end. It would suck if they didn't.
but they lose twice, and I've never seen that in a piece of fiction. This is the power of the mid-type literary apocalypse as exemplified through the incredible To Apocalypse 20th Century Boys, a story of infinite perseverance no matter how far you fall or how long it takes you to get back. It's not how you start or how you end, it's how you continue. So let's continue. Our aforementioned eyed viewers have surely noticed by now that one square of our table has gone thus far unutilized. We've done personal, major, and universal scale star-type literary apocalypses, and the same for n-type literary apocalypses. And we've covered personal and major scale mid-type literary apocalypses. But we haven't looked at any examples of universal scale mid-type literary apocalypses. This is because those are really fucking hard to do.
How do you do a major scale mid-type literary apocalypse then just keep the story going? What, is a meteor going to hit Beverly Hills and we watch the ghoulish versions of Brandon and Brenda navigate the struggles of fitting in post-apocalyptic high school and scavenging? Huh? I see. I have been asked to mention Riverdale.
So how do you do a universal scale literary apocalypse and still have a substantial enough part of the story left? Well, the answer is Deltarune.
But Deltarune is not a direct sequel, but a spiritual successor, and thus has no event, singular or otherwise, that impacts all the characters.
You come into my house on the day of my sleeper video about 20th Century Boys sleeper video about Deltarune. And you try to tell me what is and isn't relevant?
Fine. We're now ready for Deltarune. So let me ask you a different question. Are you familiar with Crisis on Infinite Earths? Coming into the 1980s, DC Comics' sales were dipping below those of their main publishing rival Marvel Comics. Despite being a cornerstone of the comic book industry, their multiverse was beginning to stagnate and readers were losing interest. It was then the then editor on Green Lantern, Marv Wolfman, pitched the story to the DC board. Wolfman wanted to leave the DC multiverse behind entirely, reunifying all of their best characters into one tight, lean, mean machine, thereby revitalizing and basically restarting the DC universe. The DC board approved, and the result was Crisis on Infinite Earths, a 12-issue story that ended with the functional reboot of the DC universe. See, the DC universe is actually composed of a bunch of different series that kind of make up one overall story. These series coexist and occasionally interact with each other within this grander narrative that has occasional large points of intersection. Through this lens of one overall story, Crisis on Infinite Earths becomes a mid-type literary apocalypse. The DC timeline is even separated into pre- and post-Crisis. It was a universal-scale, literarily apocalyptic, singular-defined event that fundamentally shifted the setting and impacted every single character. This is where you'll find most universal-scale mid-type literary apocalypses, in the realm of multiverses, alternate universes, and crossovers. Alternate universes, or AUs, are an essential part of how most superhero comics work, but they've steadily become more prevalent in all kinds of media. Despite this growth in official representation, a large number of AUs, if not the majority of them, arise from one source, a source in which by extension you can find many universal-scale mid-type literary apocalypses. Gentle ladies and gentler men, welcome to the world of fanfiction.
I drew Sonic the Hedgehog dressed as a cop giving you back shots.
Fanfiction, derived as it often is about as old as fiction itself. It seems most things are at this point. Most modern living religions started as fanfiction of religions that came before them. Many scholars believe that the true name of God is actually just a mistranslated ship name of two Mesopotamian deities. So it turns out there's no actual proof or disclaimer, and it's much more likely to come from the word for I will be. Anyway, for most of the very modern era, however, the line between canon and fanfiction had been very clear. This side is official release, this side is other shit. The internet did what it usually does though and changed everything. As creating, publishing, and consuming fan works all became much more accessible practices, the quality rose and the line between fanfiction and official release blurred significantly. Widely agreed upon fan canon, or fanon, became canon. Fan creators got popular enough to be given reins on official releases, and occasionally fan works got so popular that they would spin themselves off into new legally distinct franchises, which is basically what Jeezy Boy and his 12 pals did way back when. Now, am I saying that the New Testament is directly equivalent to 50 Shades of Grey and the Old Testament is Twilight? Yes. An alternate universe or timeline is experientially a kind of literary apocalypse. We've always had that need to shake things up, see characters in the new status quo who's fucking shit those spiders.
This is what the appeal of the mid-type apocalypse is, after all, and it's one that's hard to cater to, but it's one that's perfectly answered by an AU. A setting shift that impacts all characters, is singularly defined, and fundamentally changes the status quo. It's everything that makes an event apocalyptic, minus the event. This rarely catered to, literarily apocalyptic need for endless variants, answered by fanfiction, is the main reason why AUs are so popular online. Undertale is a great example. There are a lot of Undertale fan AUs. People just wanted more of that goddamn skeleton so bad. They wanted to see these characters in every setting and situation possible. They wanted to create their own versions and iterate and appropriate and develop and evolve. For a lot of people, however, many of whom craved more Undertale the way a man currently being kicked craves not being kicked, fanworks just didn't cut it. Without our knowledge as audience members that this was official, significant, it could feel ultimately frivolous and not satiate that mid-type literary apocalypse need.
Part 3C. Good thing Undertale has an official AU.
Deltarune is a spiritual successor and as of yet not direct sequel to 2016 monster dating simulator Undertale. That's not it. Thank you. There's a lot of hints and maybe connected, but as of the release of Chapter 4, we simply don't know yet, and the talented freak Toby Fox refuses to tell me.
What's wrong with this guy? Yeah, you should probably just tell him.
This is a meta-apocalypse, a type of literary apocalypse that relies on the story's interaction with its creator and consumer to create an apocalypse rather than a strictly literal story event. It's a spectrum. Some apocalypses, like most of those we've seen so far, are almost entirely literal, while others, like Deltarune, are almost entirely meta. But all apocalypses rely to some degree on the creator and audience's awareness of them as such. Meta-apocalypses just push that aspect to the extreme. Crisis on Infinite Earths is 100% both. It's literally an apocalypse. Infinite Earths get crisis. It's a literary apocalypse, as we just explained. And it's a meta-apocalypse, as it was born of the writers and audience's shared frustration with the DC universe, and is predicated entirely on the reader's familiarity with it as an in and out of universe concept. If you didn't know about the multiverse, the Infinite Earths getting crisis meant nothing. The meta-apocalypse in its purest form is all the experiential effects of the literary apocalypse, the universal impact of a singularly defined change on the setting and all the characters, without an in-universe cause. The characters don't even have to know it happened. It's everything that makes an event apocalyptic, minus the event. Omega Glyph, the spiritual successor to the Yofkagam, is a story where the concept of the player is translated into the game itself, as you do not play as Chris, but rather the strange force possessing them. This is the level almost all fanfics operate on to some degree, because until canonized, no matter how minute the difference, it is technically an alternate timeline to the official one, an AU, non-canon until proven canon. It's a story about the meaning of our interaction with art itself, very fitting for a pure meta-literary apocalypse. While we don't know exactly how much Mr. Bones knows quite yet, meta-apocalypses don't mandate that none of the characters know about the apocalyptic change. The Rick and Morty Season 1 episode Rick Potion 9 ends with the entire world irreparably destroyed, only for the two titular characters to switch over to an identical reality where they just died, switch places with their newly corpseified parallels.
Cadaverific.
Experientially, practically, everything is exactly the same as far as anyone could ever tell, but Morty and we know that everything is definitionally different. In this way, the meta-apocalypse can connect us far more deeply with the characters. Like Alpha Sigil and its predecessor Gialia's Fistel, Rick and Morty uses the fourth wall as a medium to converse between creator, art, and audience. Archer kinda had a similar thing going on when Archer fell into a coma because the creator got bored. For the next 3 seasons, we had a new concept every time. 1940s Archer, Island Archer, Space Archer. It has that 20th century boy's joy of seeing what each character is like this time, works on a meta level because we know it's all a dream and engage with it as such, and has a singularly defining event, Archer getting quasi-vegetoided. It makes a strong case, but depending on your opinion of the post-coma seasons, lacks that lasting impact, making it more vignette than literary apocalypse. So meta-apocalypses allow for radical freedom in exploring new ideas, but they can also work as tools for delivering meta messages. In the Adventure Time world, Fiona and Cake are fanfiction characters created by the Ice King to share with his cool friends Finn and Jake.
This blew my 9-year-old mind and made me feel many emotions, and 10 years later, I had become an adult, and Fiona and Cake got their own TV show, which also makes me feel many emotions.
Suddenly, these in-universe fan creations were real. They're from an unauthorized universe and have been sentenced to stop existing.
At the end of the show, after traveling from world to world, the day is saved, their universe is canonized, and Season 2 is greenlit.
Control over the universe is set free, and there's a potential that more strange and unique universes will pop up. Fiona and Cake, the characters, have always been a comment on the nature of fanfiction itself, and Fiona and Cake, the show, in ending in both a literal apocalypse as well as a meta-universal scale N-type literary apocalypse, makes a very clear point about the nature of AUs, fanfiction, and iteration in art. A point which brings us to the most important question of this video.
So what?
So what? So you made a table. So you categorized it. So what? What does any of this tell us other than this just is a thing that is? Well, the ending of Fiona and Cake makes a clear meta-statement. The fanfiction world is just as legitimate as the real universe. There shouldn't be a clearer way to say that fan work is good, that art belongs to everyone who made and consumed it, that it should be handed over. All very Adventure Time points to make. Through its meta-apocalypse, the show stakes its claim in the war of all fanfiction. The war against intellectual property. Intellectual property, like many of Capital's slippery tendrils, has an on-the-face-of-it worthy goal to compensate the artists for their work. But even if artists were to own their own work, which in the majority of mainstream cases they do not, the system would still suck.
I'm gonna go to the fucking Supreme Court and try to make this shit easier for niggas like me to clear these samples, man. If you made the fucking music and you made the art and you put it into the world, I should be able to use it however the fuck I want. I'm gonna pay you, I'm gonna give you a percentage, but you shouldn't be able to tell me I can't use it. That's fucked up, nigga. You was inspired by the world, allow the world to be inspired by your shit.
Narratives and art itself evolve through iteration, through appropriation, through using what came before. This is as true today as it was in the days of Mesopotamia, and fanfiction from the Aeneid to Scubenshag has always been a part of that.
This point, were it to be a man, perhaps a behatted mustachioed man with a catchphrase like "see you on the cheesy pages," would be no stranger to creator of Deltarune and Undertale, Tobert Fox, who cut his teeth on fanworks of his favorite games and has been supportive of fanworks of his own creations. Chapter 4 of Deltarune is all about religion and the iterative nature of stories. It even takes place in a church and has some thick, juicy themes. The prophecy of Deltarune, which is told to us before beginning the game, reappears in Chapter 4 as a sermon in church, because it is actually the in-universe religious text of the world of Deltarune. With this, Deltarune constructs its genius looping babushka doll of an idea. Throughout Deltarune, references are made to an in-universe series of games called Dragon Blazers, the narrative of which often mirrors events in the real story of Deltarune. Having an in-universe piece of media reflect the story's events is nothing mind-blowing to anyone familiar with Duck Detective or Crying Breakfast Friends, but what is mind-blowing is the Dragon Blazers, the in-universe series of games, is actually based on an in-universe series of books called Lord of the Hammer, and in Chapter 4, when meeting the author of Lord of the Hammer, they tell us that their story is actually just an iteration on the prophecy, their world's first narrative, that they took something and changed some others, and when Dragon Blazers adapted their books, they did the same thing, because the nature of art is iteration and adaptation, and the nature of iteration and adaptation is change. The Jokin Universe game, paralleling the story of the actual game we're playing, is based on an influential book series based on the prophecy of the actual game we're playing. It's genius! This is exactly the point we were making. Deltarune names religion as the first point on the graph of the evolution of narrative and says that it evolved through a series of iterations, each iteration a meta-apocalypse on its own for those familiar with the steps respective original. To satiate our perpetually replenishing questions, we create infinite meta-apocalypses until we forget the status quo to which they were reacting and they become our new canon, from religion to stories to modern media. Intellectual property, or any alike attempt at the hands of capital to exert control over people's engagement with art, is in this lens fundamentally opposed to the evolution of art itself. All religion is fanfiction of the religion that came before, and the first AO3 post was about the earth and the heavens. Superman is Jesus Christ, and they all stand on the shoulders of giants. You could argue that if we broaden our little literary apocalypse definition wide enough, then basically everything is an apocalypse. To some degree, that's true, because any conversation between two people has the potential to change the entire status quo of those two's relationship. Literary apocalypses are a vital force in human narrative, having propelled it deeper than it ever could have gone otherwise. And today, the tools for making them are as viable as a Bible and a Fivel. And today, the tools for making a literary apocalypse are more widely available than ever. Maybe that will weaken the apocalypse. Part of its appeal might be the officialness. People argue over Bible canon, after all. On a practical level, literary apocalypses are devices for unveiling truths about the world and our own nature. Being able to differentiate them lets you know what they're trying to say. Apply these concepts to the next book you read or movie you watch to see if and how they utilize literary apocalypses. Hell, you could even make an argument that albums like Low by David Bowie or Abbey Road by Ringo Boy and his Three Gay Dads count as literary apocalypses, with their abruptly and radically differing first and second sides. Always look for the singular defining event. Oh, David. On a more philosophical level, fiction is an inherent, unregulatable part of humanity, and apocalypses, both literal and literary, are an essential part of it. The two have grown and evolved side by side, and this evolution happened through borrowing, appropriating, and reiterating ideas from our neighbors, from our ancestors, and eventually, for better and often for worse, on a global scale. Stories are by their nature an ephemeral shared experience. Our reaction to and consumption of the text are part of it because every person provides a unique experience. Apocalypses affect not just the story and the characters, but us as well. They unveil or reveal things about us. This is the world of fanfiction, a fast-flying, free-form exploration of ideas through meta-apocalypses reliant entirely on the audience's and creators' awareness of and engagement with the media. This is what Deltarune is about, a game that plays with the idea of game, player, and creators so literally and talks about the very nature of stories themselves. Capital and cultural hegemony try to limit our access to art. They abuse intellectual property to control the way in which we can iterate upon our own art and inspirations. This stifles our art. It stops us from being able to answer our base creative need, to satiate our questions. This is a primal need, a need for variation, a need for certainty, for completion, a need for the exhaustive. If you're optimistic, the infinite digital apocalypse can be a chance to fight back, an offer of a way out. You could make a convincing argument that we are currently seeing the end of artistry before our eyes, but I tend to be a glass half full kind of guy. You know, Undertale feels fitting for this video. Apocalypses satiate the questions we simply must have answers to, and Undertale, at its heart, is a game about our want as players to see everything. Is completionism just a way to deal with the most basic question of death? No!
Part 5. What happened to the completionists? I was like 10 and I'm still really confused about why Greg left.
There'll be nobody left behind to grieve, and we will all go together when we go. In my head. So sweaty, I'm sweaty boy. We've had the donkey butt. I got that donkey in me. I got the donkey in my heart. As you can well see, I got the donkey in my ears and it's making me bleed.
Howdy doodles!
Definition of just stay in place, please.
Superman! Fuck Superman! Superman! I'm gonna kill Superman!
So tired. My name's Woe and woe is me. Feed me your children. That's a haiku.
What the fuck am I talking about? What are these words?
Take God knows how many.
Hey man, let's eat.
Superman! Ay, caramba! Is that racist?
You will all go directly to your respective Valhallas. Go directly to the past, go to not collect $201. And we will all go together when we go. Anyway.
This has been fun. Thank you so much. And we're done.